Okay, so with hurricane season right around the corner, let's talk about a few things hurricane related. So, right now they're expecting us to go into what's called its technical name is the Enzo Southern Oscillation, but I'm gonna show you how we're going into a La Nina, which basically means I'll just show you. So, when the waters right here are 0.4 degrees below average, that is a La Nina, and it's basically because in a La Nina, there's trade winds blowing this way, taking that it causes upwelling of cold water from down under to come under, and we'll see over here in the Nina 4 area, we'll see a lot of hot water in a La Nina, and during an El Nino, we'll see a lot of warm water. A lot of cold water, because El Nino winds are flowing this way, causing a lot more shear in the Caribbean, which basically, for a hurricane to form, they want basically no shear, and they just want they want no shear. So, but with an El Nino, tropical storms that usually come into the Caribbean going westward, and then turn northward into the Gulf of Mexico, or they just loop out and go into what we call fish storms, like I talked in my last hurricane video. But next, I'm going to show you what the trend is. So as we rise out of our last La Nina period into our El Nino period, right now we're in what's called an Enzo neutral, which basically means we're not in a La Nina or an El Nino. We're in between. Those waters out there, they aren't too warm, but they also aren't too cold. And this is for the February, March, April, that area, we're in an Enzo neutral. There's basically, anyway, I'm just gonna get into. So it doesn't just affect it doesn't just affect the hurricane season. It affects the weather we're seeing. During a La Nina, there's a high pressure out here in the Pacific, causing that jet stream to go into what's called a zonal flow, flowing straight west to east. And that brings with drier conditions down in the south, like where I am in the Florida Panhandle, and drier and warmer conditions for the whole entire eastern, and then wetter up here in the Pacific Northwest, and colder up here in the Canadian prairies. And then during an El Nino, up there in the Canadian prairies, it's warm, and then in the Midwest, it's going to be drier, and then all along the south from California over to North Carolina and Florida, it is wet. It is wetter and colder. Now let's look at the hurricane predictions. So, for the 2025 forecast, they're forecasting for the early season forecast. Again, NOAA's forecast doesn't come out until May, and we'll talk about that one when it comes out. But they're forecasting between 13 and 18 storms, and then 7 to 10 hurricanes, and that is still above average. It's really above average. It's not as many hurricanes as we saw last year, though. And on the high end, we'll see as many named storms as we saw last season. Last season was just a super active season. It started out, we actually had the first ever Category 5 hurricane before August last year. And then they're forecasting between three to five major hurricanes, so above average. Last year we saw 5. Milton, Helene, Kirk, some of the fish storms, but the main ones that impact us was Beryl, Francine, Helene and Milton and one, like a post-tropical, and then like potential tropical storm. It was still a potential tropical cyclone when it hit land, but it made landfall in North Carolina, eastern North Carolina. And the historical averages are 14 named storms, which we're going to be at or over or a tiny bit under for this season so far. This is still really far out to have an accurate forecast. But they're expecting we're going to have an above average hurricane season already, which I would call us going in the higher end, just with all the ingredients we have, because we may not have the record warmth, uh, waters during the hurricane season, but I would suspect that we'll be within a couple tenths of a degree, because these hurricanes, they're bad. Well, it's kind of already said, but warm water temperatures and hurricanes, that's just bad. Like last year, we saw Hurricane Milton intensify from a tropical depression to a Category 5 within 12 hours. That is pretty sure that was the first time we'd ever seen that. And back to that first picture I showed, typical La Nina, the tropics in a typical La Nina activity will bring more activity to the Caribbean and Gulf and the Gulf, because we'll have less wind shear over the Caribbean, so therefore hurricanes, whenever they get wind shear, it tears them apart, because they need hurricanes. Think about it. Wind shear is different wind speed or directions at different altitudes in the atmosphere. In hurricanes, they're one single rotation, spinning, going all the way up to the top of the troposphere, and it's just spinning. And if there's wind shears going at different speeds and directions, it's going to tilt that. It's basically going to tear apart the hurricane. And we're already seeing really warm temperatures. We're at average except for up here in the Gulf. We're above average up there in the Gulf. But we are seeing leaning above water temperatures. We're already going into, I think we may have another really devastating hurricane season. And this is the historical averages for La Nina and El Nina. La Nina, we said usually whenever we're in La Nina, we see active storms. And we're expecting the typical La Nina. There's 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. And then in El Nina, we see 11 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. Now, as you can see, last year we started off in an El Nino, which is why we started so dry in the south. I mean, not dry, wet in the south. And we had a bunch of severe storms in the south. But then we faded off into an ENSO neutral. And during our most active months, we were in an ENSO neutral, and we had a very high active hurricane season. And that is, we're basically going to be in the same conditions as we were last year for this. Okay, one thing I wanted to add in before I was done. Last year, I saw a bunch of this, but it was basically a bunch of people, they're like, oh, a hurricane's not that bad. We can survive through it. But if a hurricane, like take for instance Milton, it was a Category 3 when it made landfall. So and it was before it was Category 5 coming inland. Most hurricanes, they weaken right before. This season was actually the first season we saw the hurricane strengthen right before it made landfall. But for generally, hurricanes weaken right before landfall, especially coming into late October and November, because it's the closer you get to land, the water depth is going, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, the water depth is going to be a lot smaller than whenever it's out in the main ocean, so that takes a lot less to cool down. But hurricanes, if they were at once a Category 5 and they're pushing that Category 5 storm surge, and if it weakens, the Saffir-Simpson scale is based off of wind speed, and a Category 5 storm, like take for instance Katrina, it was Category 5 out in the ocean, and it weakened right before landfall, but it was still pushing that Category 5 storm surge of 28 feet. And it takes a lot longer for a hurricane, storm surge to dissipate. It takes more time for hurricanes storm surge to dissipate than it takes for the winds to weaken. So therefore, whenever it made landfall, it was still pushing that Category 5 storm surge. But it was only a Category 3, so everybody was like, we can go through it. But Category 3, Category 5, in my opinion, Category 2 or above, especially if it was a Category 5, that is worth at least going to higher ground for, because they can be really bad, and the 2024 hurricane season really showed us all that. But thank you for watching this, and bye.